episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is Ronan O'Connell, or Professor Ronan O'Connell from Dublin in Ireland. Ronan and I have known each other, as he says in the interview, for almost 50 years. We were in medical school together. He has pursued an extraordinarily successful career in a range of arenas, first and foremost, of course, being a highly respected colorectal surgeon. In medical politics, he became president of the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, as well as president of the European Surgical Association. He has just finished releasing as editor-in-chief of Bailey and Love, which many people will know is the world's most successful surgical textbook. His fifth edition, I think, for him, over 20 years worth of sweat equity. He has a lot of interesting things to say about his surgical career, how he came to arrive at various stages and decisions he made, as well as a number of observations that are worth listening to in terms of modern surgery. So without further ado, don't forget to like and subscribe the channel, and please comment and let me have some thoughts. But in the meantime, let's join Ronan O'Connell. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives.
Hi there. Hi, John.
Ronan, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Just as well, I checked this morning because you must have changed your time last week. We're changing it this week. So
Yes.
We're only 4 hours ahead.
Yes, exactly. That is correct. We did. That's always it's I think it was 2 weeks ago actually. But anyway, whatever. There's always that little weird week or two where it's 4 hours, which causes mayhem, etc.
An awful lot of missed flights, I suspect.
What I ask people to do, even those people who I know better than others, is to start off for the audience and with a little bit about your initial life and career journey, starting with the words, "I was born in."
Well, I was born in Dublin nearly 67 years ago, 1956. And John, you and I have known each other almost 50 years, which is you probably know about as much about me as probably anybody outside of the immediate family, which makes me wonder why, in goodness name, you asked me to interview. But it's a real pleasure to be invited. I grew up in a suburb of Dublin called Temple Oak. My parents were school teachers. That's just telling me it's 4 o'clock here in Ireland, and I was supposed to be on a video link with you. You know, I've measured out my life with coffee spoons, kind of thing. I've measured out my life now with alarms on my Apple Watch to tell me where I should be. I think that has come with retirement from clinical practice, which I did a couple of years ago, and we can explain why in a little while. And when you're in clinical practice, of course, your time is not your own, and everything is you have to be somewhere all the time. But when you have time, it's true that the day extends to fill, or your work or whatever you're doing extends to fill all the time. So alarms are useful if you have to be somewhere. Anyway, coming back, my parents were school teachers, and when my first memories are no television, and Sunday evening was by a fireside doing the Sunday Times crossword. I wasn't doing it, but my parents were. They were Latin and English teachers, and discussion often was around the derivation of words from Old English and things like that, which actually, if you follow my career, does explain a little bit why I have been very much involved with editing and publishing. And my parents both, when I read back over letters that we got from them and things that they wrote, they had what was called in those days a very good hand. Not only was it legible, but there was a style.
Mm-hmm.
There was a style about it that I suppose would be, well, my father was born in 1915, so it was very late Victorian, Edwardian upbringing he would have had. My mother, he was born in Dublin. Interestingly, he was born just before the 1916 revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And his father, my grandfather, was a member of the Dublin Metropolitan Police at the rank of inspector, and was involved in, I suppose, the civil unrest that happened in 1916. And then my father got diphtheria at the age of 2.5 and survived it, which in those days was good fortune. But the wisdom of the time was that he should get country air. So he went down to West Limerick to an aunt. And it's interesting, one of his first memories is of what we know in Ireland as the Black and Tans. That would be the auxiliaries in the Irish War of Independence, and of seeing bodies being gathered up on a tender after an ambush. And this impression at the age of 4 or 5 lasted, I suppose, with him. And he didn't come back to his family till he was about 7. And then, of course, they were Dubliners and he was the country boy. So he was a slightly more, I suppose, isolated person in a way. And he married late. He was 40. So he was an older man in my childhood. And I think that explains a lot of what I've, I guess, inherited, is that slight distance that he had. I wish in my childhood that he was younger and I was older, if you know what I mean, that we were closer. Though we were, I mean, there was no animosity or anything. And my mother grew up in a place called Baltinglass, County Wicklow, and she wasn't of great means, but was a very, very bright young student.
Mm-hmm.
But she got a scholarship to university, and then in order to continue in university, had to get the scholarship every year to get first class and first place. And that academic drive also was imbued in me.
Yes.
That you just had to do your best. It didn't matter what the outcome was, as long as you did your best. And so I had a happy childhood, I have to say. I came into my own academically towards the later years in high school or secondary school, and then got to university. I have one brother who's 6 years younger than me. I suppose I was leaving school when he was coming into the senior school. I was leaving university when he came into university. So there's it's almost like we're two only children.
Right.
He's done very well for himself. He now leads the TSMC, Taiwanese Semiconductor Corporation, design team in Ottawa, designing extraordinary chips. I mean, they're light years ahead of us in what they've already designed. So
I was just going to say, I mean, you tell your story, and everybody has their story, and it is interesting how, for many people, it informs the way they behave. Having known you since medical school, during medical school, you were known to all as somebody who was academically driven, as you say. You were, well, I think it would be fair to say some of us were, shall we say, less focused on getting 100% in the exams than others. That was not really for you. I mean, you clearly had a desire to do it. And I always, I don't know whether, I don't know if I ever said this to you, but I always had a slight sympathy for you. Well, because
That's a very kind of you, John.
well, you will recall that a fellow classmate, one Brian Murray, you know, came to us tagged with the label of having come first in the leaving in something or other. I can't remember, but as you know, Brian was, and I think is, enormously gifted, and with that sense of being out all night drinking and smoking and carousing, and then he would turn up for the exam, and you know, in a haze, would always come first. You know,
And then you remember Patrick Ma.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd love to catch up with Patrick. Patrick, now, whether it is true or not, but it is said that he had this system for reading Grey's Anatomy where he tore out the pages and stuck them on a form of washing line that he then just lay in the bed and put. Now, I think this is probably untrue, but.
So your background was not medical. So
I had my father's older brother was an ENT surgeon.
Right. Okay.
And I also had his sister was married to a doctor in public health that was Malachi Powell, and you would have known perhaps David Powell and Frank and those. So they also continued in medicine, my cousins. And then also I had an uncle who was a general practitioner, and I think it was my Uncle Bob, the general practitioner, who gave me that sense that of really. I remember he was a country GP, and I remember sitting as a child in the back of his old Wolseley, which is a car that not many people would remember. As a country doctor, going out and going into houses with the bag and seeing, you know, people in the 60s, when life was quite different as it is now. And it was extraordinary. Later on, I did some locums for him, and you know, he had the most extraordinary, very good record system. And I remember he used to take a half day every week and go and read the British Medical Journal to keep himself, you know, up to date. So I think it was actually my Uncle Bob that was the role model.
It again, as you say, many people may not have heard of the name Wolseley, and I think probably also fewer people would realize that there was a certain cachet with the Wolseley, because in fact it was an identical car to the Austin, but it was considered a markup on the Austin. It was made by the same manufacturer, as you know, and its little illuminated badge above the radiator was very much an indicator that the owner was just a click above the average person, which of course perfect for the country doctor, you know.
Well, if he was driving an old Ford Cortina, I wouldn't have remembered it, but I did remember the Wolseley.
Yeah, exactly. So you went on then to follow, as did I, what I think would be considered a fairly traditional career path, you know, junior surgical training, higher surgical training, the equivalent as we all know of, you know, been to America, BTA, and you know, the Irish have to travel, as you know, and you know, our paths crossed intermittently over those years, etc. And you know, in more senior years, began to cross, I think, when we both landed in London in various aspects. You with a clear vision of a temporary you know, stop in London before returning to Ireland, and me with no immediate intention to return. So when you were in the Royal London with Professor Norman Williams, now Sir Norman Williams, and in fact a forthcoming guest on this podcast and YouTube
Excellent.
channel. Where did you see yourself at that point? What were your ambitions at that point?
Well, when we were in London, Pauline and I were married, and we had a small child, Catherine. And I mean, we were hoping to settle down. It was all a bit fraught in those days because there were very few consultant jobs, very few. And I mean, when we were appointed as senior registrars, I think there were 3 appointed each year. Now there are 9, 10, 11 appointed every year. So it was tight, and that reflected the number of jobs that there were. John Farndon had asked me to go and look at David Bortolow's job. David had just moved from Bristol to Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And so that was a possibility, because I was doing really a 1-year stint at the London.
Yeah.
And that we knew it was 1 year. And then there were 2 jobs that came up in Ireland that were suitable, or that might have been suitable. One was at Beaumont Hospital, and everybody knew that it was Joe Deasy's job. Joe was doing the locum and had worked there and had trained. I think Joe had trained in Leeds.
He had, yes.
Yeah. And truly it was the right appointment for Joe, and it was the right appointment for Beaumont, and he did extraordinarily well. And then there was this potential job at the Mater Hospital, which I'd never worked in, and hadn't even been a student there. And it was a general surgery job because colorectal surgery wasn't a recognized specialty or subspecialty interest. And well, I think nobody was more surprised than I to get the job, but I got it, and we moved back. And I have to say, I spent 17 very happy years at Mater. I was a single-handed colorectal surgeon, and started out. I succeeded Sean Heffernan, who actually had published probably the largest series of highly selective vagotomies in the world. He published over 500 with Tom Walsh, and I arrived, and of course suddenly Helicobacter had appeared, and I don't think I ever did one, but I was doing everything from thyroids to breast surgery as we did in those days.
Exactly. Yeah.
And my colleagues, I was getting referred more recurrent rectal cancer than primary rectal cancer. And over time, it just evolved, and I was extraordinarily busy operating Monday, Wednesday, Friday. 1 year did 1,000 cases, single-handed. Of course, we had very experienced and very good senior registrars with us. Yeah. That was the way we could do that. And then I suppose after about 12 years, I managed to get a second appointee, Anne Brannigan, and it was the beginning of the laparoscopic era. And so Anne went off and did a fellowship in laparoscopic surgery and came back, and she started doing the laparoscopic colorectal surgery. But I was so busy at the time that I really didn't have time for the learning curve. And, the results were good. And I didn't want really to, I suppose, jeopardize anybody by going on the learning curve, while others, and particularly yourself and others, really took to it and defined it and showed us how we should do it properly, and the benefits are there for everybody to see. So it's now
Sure.
it's the default option. But actually, then as time moved on, there needed to be somebody to do the complex open
Yeah.
redo stuff. And that's where I suppose towards the end of my career I morphed into. And I was quite happy to let younger people do the laparoscopic work and then the robotic work.
Yeah, and it's a conversation I've had with faculty here, as pertains to robotics. Where a few years ago, I challenged the younger people to come and tell me in 2 or 3 months. I said, come and tell me what your plan is for robotic surgery in your career. And what I said to them was, if you're going to come back and say, I plan to be a robotic surgeon by this time next year, fine. Or if your plan is, I'm planning to be a proctologist or a redo surgeon, therefore not doing robotics, that's also fine. But I said, if your answer in 3 months is, I don't think it's for me, then that's not fine, because you're not going to survive a career without addressing that issue. And 5 years ago, our program was heavily known for transanal stuff and a lot of laparoscopy, and we had a minimal robotic program. And it rapidly became clear from the trainees that whilst the transanal stuff was nice and interesting and a bit of glitter, the expectation, demand from people employing the fellows was robotics. And so we had to intentionally transform it. And now it's actually the largest colorectal robotic program in the US.
Wow.
And, and we did that in probably 3 years. So,
but I think it's very interesting, John, that you say that you've analyzed it that way. I didn't analyze it. I kind of by default, but it was clear to me that there was a need for my skills, and other people within the unit could do the robotics, and they could do it better. They could, the psychomotor skills that you need for these things. It's hard in your 50s or early 60s to transition to these things, and it was far better. And I'm happy. It gave the others, the permission, if you like, or the approval just to go and drive it.
Yeah. Now, throughout your 17 years, I think you said, in the Mater?
I was 17 years at Mater, and that was as I got a personal chair from Newman chair from UCD. I was editor of the British Journal of Surgery. I was running research program, but I had no academic funds. I mean, this was all coming. I was doing a private practice to support my academic life, and that couldn't go on.
So was that the motivation, or was there an itch that you needed to scratch to behind your decision to go from Manchester United to Manchester City,
Or from Liverpool to Everton, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, whatever analogy, from one side of the city to the other, traditional fierce rivals.
Yeah.
There
were several reasons. The first was that there was going to be a change in the curriculum, and they were bringing in a completely new curriculum. And it was clear to me that unless somebody who was very, very engaged and involved, surgery was going to find itself as a minor subject. It was going. Secondly, we were starting a graduate entry program, and I felt there was a real need for somebody in surgery to step up to the plate to do it. Secondly, as I said, I had found myself with a personal chair running research and without so much as an office or academic support. So I was running it from my private office. And, you know, as time went on, that was not financially sustainable.
Yeah.
And the university were not about to give me the wherewithal to do that at Mater. And at the time, and you remember, the late John Fitzpatrick was the professor, he's a urologist, and there was no prospect of academic promotion at the Mater. Had
Yeah.
there been, and I could have got, if I had resources, I would have stayed and would have engaged with the university. And then I suppose there is always that itch that you become head of department
Sure.
and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know a statutory professor
Yeah.
at the top of
Mhm.
the academic pole.
Yeah, a sense of some official validation,
I think that's it. Some
uh,
validation. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's sort of, the two components. I didn't do the maths, but so how many years were you in Vincent's then?
I was 13 years in
Okay,
Vincent's.
so we'll just between us friends, we'll call it two equal times,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. It it must have been a different experience than the first half, if you like. Um, uh, it, how was it different, and was it as good, or was it what you thought you were going to get?
I think we've both had the experience, John. If you'll think back at dinner we had before you interviewed for the chair in Trinity, when all the promises that were made suddenly evaporated after the interview.
Yeah.
And so I had much the same experience.
Yes.
And I actually had to dig deep. I really had to dig deep. But because I did, um, I think I achieved a reasonable amount. I mean, by the time I left, we had a department of 5 surgeons. We had an international academic profile. We had international fellows wanting to come and work at
Hmm.
Vincent's. We had ESCP fellows coming. We had established an exchange program with the University of Melbourne. And so we had fellows coming from Australia. And, that as you well you will know well, that requires somebody at an administrative lead who's there full time and completely engaged, and that's what we did. I have to say I was very happy at Mater, and probably wouldn't have achieved as much academically if
Sure.
I had stayed where I was, because it was a service job.
Yeah.
Whereas I did have the freedom, but then I found myself operating one day a week, and and I was happiest. If you ask me where I was happiest professionally, I was happiest actually operating.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's like sailing. There's an awful lot of preparation and getting everything ready. But if you're out there and you're tacking, and then the going hell for leather, and the water's nearly coming in over the side, but it's a great feeling, and I was happiest.
So you achieved, as you say, quite a lot academically, but probably in that same phase of your career, you also achieved a lot medico-politically as well. I mean, you obviously rose to become president of the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, which is, the pinnacle of any surgical career. And and other
Well,
honors.
ESA, President of the European Surgical as well.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
So you've been highly successful in that space. Was that always?
It was
And
never an ambition, John.
I was just,
It
I
was
was
never
just
an
about to
ambition.
say to you, of course, every politician says,
Yeah.
it was never an ambition,
No.
But should I be called upon by my colleagues, etc., etc. But I know you've said that to me before, but and whilst it may not have been the burning ambition and day-to-day every waking thought, it does nonetheless take a degree of intentionality to engage, at least.
Well, it goes right back to ECCP, if you remember it, the European Council of Coloproctology, which was really run by the late Jean-Claude Marty from Geneva. And it was the first European specialist organization in coloproctology. And they had national representatives on council, and there was no Irish representative. And so I wrote to Jean-Claude and I said, well, there's no Irish. He said, well, why don't you come to the next meeting? So I fessed up at the next meeting at my own expense. And whereupon the representative of the Association of Coloproctology, Great Britain and Ireland, turned to me and said, I say, old boy, we're representing you. And it took me about a millisecond to remind them that actually the Irish Association of Coloproctology was 1 year older than the British
ACP,
and
yeah.
Irish Association. So anyway, that it was really to fly the flag was what started it, and then EACP, the European Association of Coloproctology. And again, it was a busy time, but I was willing to go, so I went. And then when they came together as the European Society of Coloproctology, ESCP, I became the national representative there. And you will know that all of these things, they take professional time. They eat into your vacation time because or your private practice time or your family time. And it was a question of really representing and flying the flag and making sure that Irish surgery was known and also knew about these things. And so that's how I started. And then I got on the council of ESCP and then became a secretary of ESCP. We had difficult times, but not because I was secretary, but because of the governance and everything else like that was tricky for a while. But it's emerged as a very, very strong and vibrant organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that Soren Lorberg, myself and Klaus Matzel met. I was secretary, Soren was the president, and Klaus was the program director, I think. And we decided that there was a little bit, and Mike Parker, who's the treasurer, and we decided that there was some money had accumulated and that we should establish a research committee and the research committee and a communications committee. And of course, these are crucial to expanding the organization beyond simply an annual meeting.
Yes.
And now it is an association that is vibrant, running studies that are involving thousands of patients, hundreds of surgeons, and tens of countries. Now, it's not earth-shattering research, but actually what it is informative research so that people know what actually the benchmarks are. What are the outcomes? of anastomosis in terms of leak rates across a broad spectrum of interested people, and that's been very important.
So
I was very fortunate then to be nominated for membership of ESA. And I've been a member of ESA for, I think, 20 years and haven't missed a meeting. And I then was, because of my involvement with the British Journal of Surgery, they asked me when I stepped down as editor, would I become editor for the ESA, which publishes the November issue of Annals.
Yeah.
And it was through that then I got onto the committees and then was asked to be the president.
And, the pathway in the college in Ireland, or indeed any of the 4 colleges, is, of course, different because the challenges are different and the potential achievements are different. I mean, far less academic and much more, if you like, health service related. And I mean, it's probably fair to say that for people holding senior positions in Ireland, such as the chair in UCD, or Trinity, for example, or whatever, to a degree, there's an expectation to stand for counsel because predecessors have. And in addition to an expectation that you might stand, there's a pretty good expectation that you will get elected. The person might get elected. And although nothing is certain in life, apart from death and taxes, of course, there's a reasonable chance that if you hang around long enough, you might become president. Not everybody does, but et cetera, et cetera. So that journey, of course, is slightly different because, during that passage of X numbers of years, the questions being put in front of you as you contribute to the college and the life of the college and what the college means to Ireland actually are different. They're not really academic questions as you just described or that sort of stuff. When you started on council in the college, what was how did your thinking change over those years? As in, when you turn up on day one, it's just great to be on council. And then a few years later, you were crystallizing your thoughts. Talk to me a little bit about that journey.
Well, of course, I didn't get elected first time I went.
You got there, though.
Well, there you are. Well, I was elected in 2008, and it wasn't a great time to be involved in anything because of the financial crash. And much of the college's assets were in property, and the property just bottomed out. Yeah. And so it was actually a very informative time in terms of governance and financial probity and how to keep an organization running. Now, clearly, the council is if you like, we're all non-executive directors of a very large institution. And as you know, RCSI differs from the other Royal Colleges with having a medical school and indeed faculties, and now, in fact, it has university status. So it is University of Medicine and Health Sciences. So it gave me extraordinary insights into how institutions run, what the importance of having a plan, a strategic plan, and of how people, if you like, parse and phrase the strategic plan, that there is accountability, and senior management, how they take sections and responsibility for the corporate plan. And so the whole structure of it was very informative. We were very lucky to have an extraordinarily capable senior management team And as you know, the college over time has gone from strength to strength, and I was able to sign on behalf of the college the commencement of €93 million building out onto St. Stephen's Green. So brave decisions have been taken. Why did I ever go on council? Well, it was really to find out what it was about.
Yeah.
It was to that was one reason. Yeah. People that I admired, Arthur Tanner, Frank Keane, Eilish McGovern, other people that we knew and admired were on council and working hard, and they seem to have, if you like, an inside knowledge which comes with being on council of where Irish surgery was going, and I wanted to be part of that.
There's no question that something that I feel quite strongly about is there is the issue of giving back in your career, whether it's teaching medical students to taking part in an association to being on council or whatever, or reviewing a paper for a journal. I always point out to people that somebody reviewed your paper, and if everybody took the stance of declining because I don't have time, then whether it's teaching a medical student or being on council or reviewing a paper, you have to pay back. I think it's inappropriate not to.
Sorry.
Yeah. So here you are now, as you say, clinically retired a couple of years. You've emerged. There is something to be said. A more suspicious individual would say that you do have a penchant for choosing the wrong timing. You went on council just as the global collapse arrived, and you became president just as the pandemic started. Perish the next organization that you take over. They're likely to be in for very tough times. Our good friend and colleague Vivian McAllister told me during his interview that everybody's CV in retrospect looks like a carefully crafted plan. Even though it may not have been. And as you know, Vivian's path to surgical eminence was most definitely not a standard pathway. But as he says, in retrospect, of course, it looks like a brilliantly cunning plan. So my question is, what next? You can, list the CVs, and they all look fantastic in terms of honors, awards, and achievements, etc., etc. Yeah. But as the late great Paddy Collins used to say, nobody remembers you apart from your patients and your students in due course. I think a very wise statement. So what's next? And as part of that, I'm going to ask you about being remembered. Namely, how would you like to be remembered, and how do you think you will be remembered?
The first consultant interview I did all those years ago was actually at the Mater. It was a job that I was never going to get anyway, but I was asked to interview. And the then president of UCD asked me, how would I like my epitaph to read? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it was the one question that I was absolutely stumped by. I certainly hope that my family remember me. I'm sure they will. And that's probably the most important memory. I don't really feel that, I want initials carved in any park bench and people want to sit down and wonder who that was. one of the things that I've really enjoyed, and I don't know that I have it here because I'm moving my office, but I've really enjoyed being involved with Bailey and Love. This is the big
Yes.
textbook.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've just published, and I've succeeded Norman as the editor-in-chief, the 28th edition, but I've been involved with the 25th, 26th, 27th,
Yeah.
28th edition. So that's 20 years of, editing what is the biggest selling textbook in the world still. And, that's something that I'm very pleased with. And somebody may remember it when they take it off the shelf, if there are any books on shelves in years to come.
Yes.
But,
That's a good point. Yeah.
um, will I be remembered as being the COVID president? It's extraordinary. A year on, how we've all kind of blanked it out. I mean,
Yeah.
we've just pressed the pause button is gone, and we've just resumed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet we achieved an enormous amount during those 2 years. Keeping the show on the road was the biggest achievement, but actually, no trainee that I'm aware of, lost a year of training in our system anyway.
I think it's
Medical
very
students.
interesting that, as you say, you achieved an awful lot despite the pandemic. And of course, one of the reasons for that in many walks of life are that there were certain things that you were unable to do because of whatever restrictions were in
Mm,
place, which of course drove people to do other things
mm,
or develop other things. So, for example, 4 years ago, you would be hard pressed to tell people what Zoom or Teams was, and when it
mm,
started, it was unbelievably awful. It's not wonderful now, but it drove technology. It stopped you doing things that, with the benefit of hindsight, again, as Vivian would say, it looks cunning. You suddenly realize actually that activity you used to do was not that useful, really. And there's other
Oh yeah,
things.
spending days traveling to go to a meeting that could be achieved in 30 minutes. It's extraordinary. And yet uh you do lose over time
Mhm.
the personal connection.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And there's a lot that's achieved over the cup of coffee before the meeting,
Yeah.
or whatever. One of the things that I learned as chairman of big meetings is never go into a meeting unless you know the outcome.
Sure.
And if things are going pear-shaped, you take it off and you say, well, we might take this aside and come back to it next time, because that doesn't mean that you take advice, you take counsel, and you modify the plan if it's clearly something that doesn't have support. Well, then you don't drive it. But
Sure. Yeah. I
yeah,
think there's a couple, there are also some bad things emerged from the choices in the technology development. So for example, as you say, you didn't have to travel for 2 days for a 30-minute meeting. That's a good thing, despite the loss of interaction, etc. But before COVID, nobody would have dreamed of having back to back to back to back meetings on your Outlook calendar without a gap anywhere, number
yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah,
And nobody, by the way, would have dreamed of ever having duplicate meetings on your Outlook calendar. Because of course people were suddenly able to log on to two or indeed three computers and apparently be on all three meetings at the same time.
yes,
So
yes,
there's a
yes.
huge lack of engagement associated with virtual meetings. When
Yeah,
you switch the picture off, you could be anywhere,
yeah.
and
And many
people
people
were.
are somewhere.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Absolutely.
No, that's it. That's exactly right. So what are you, if you were talking to a medical student or a very young surgeon, Are you optimistic for the future of surgery as a profession, or specifically in Ireland? Are you optimistic? Would you
Oh,
tell these people,
I mean,
go
we're
west, young
very,
man or young lady?
we are, well, we're both very fortunate to live in wealthy countries. I mean, when we were growing up, we could not have imagined the wealth that's here in Ireland now,
Mm-hmm.
and the level of healthcare that actually is available, notwithstanding, the capacity issues and all of that are there. The other thing that's extraordinary is that when we went to medical school, the life expectancy in Ireland was about 73 years. It's now 84. Now, I came across an interesting statistic that within the European Union, looking at healthy life years, we're actually quite close to the top, but it's about 65 healthy years. So what has happened in our lifetime is that if you just take percentages or whatever it is, the average person now has got something of the 15 to 18 unhealthy years.
Yeah.
And that we're keeping people going well past what would have been their sell-by date when we started. Am I optimistic? It's changed. It's changed into and quite rightly, it's changed into a team rather than being the surgeon. You're a member of a surgical team, and you may be, if you're the attending or the consultant, you may be the team leader at that time, but there is no place for the idols that there were in the past. Now, and leadership actually has changed as well. Leadership is bringing people with you, not people expecting people to follow because of who you are or the position you hold. It's bringing people with you, and I think that's what's changed. The the expectation of Generation Z and the millennials is quite different.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, you and I, if we had to get a job, there was no expectation of taking a gap year and doing what like, well, maybe some people sail around the world single-handed in a catamaran, and that's fine. And you drive very elegant cars, and I've had the pleasure of actually admiring them in your garage. But I think people now, they want a better work-life balance.
Yeah.
They're not prepared to work the 80 to 100 hours a week that we regularly worked. And I look back and, do I regret it? I don't regret it, except that I wish I probably had more time with family.
Yeah. And it's interesting, a number of surgeons have commented to me that one of the changes that has happened over the last 30 years has been that a conversation like this today would never have happened 30 years ago, because even to discuss such issues as work-life balance and things like that would have been considered a mark of weakness.
Yeah.
And so that has to be a good thing. But along that line, what advice would you give to the graduating Ronan O'Connell? The one that used to
Follow
be
your
back
instinct
there.
and take opportunities when opportunities come. I mean, we've both, when, as Vivian said, reported back, you look back and said, well, that's a well-charted thing. But as we went forward, we didn't know what the next move was going to be. I certainly never set out to have been at the Mater or St. Vincent's or the president of the college, but opportunities came. I mean, I went to Mayo to do research with Keith Kelly with the expectation that I'd be an upper GI surgeon because that was the background. And then the opportunity came with the ileal pouch, and then I got Bob Beert and Roger Doswa and Bruce Wolfe offered me a fellowship in colorectal surgery. In fact, I was the first international fellow in colorectal surgery at Mayo, and that's what got me on that career as a colorectal surgeon. So I would just say, take the opportunities as they come.
And if you had the opportunity to go back and say to the young Ronan O'Connell, hey, listen, I've watched you, and now I'm where I am now. Here's a word in your ear to not do this, what would it be? I mean, I know very well what it would be for me, but
I have no regrets, actually. I don't have regrets. I mean, the regrets I have are the small number of patients who had a very, very bad outcome from my intervention. And I think all of us through our years will have had that. Sure. Those are my regrets for my practice. Yeah, I might have done things differently. And if I hadn't been appointed in the Mater, I probably would have gone to Bristol, and I probably would have had a very different life course,
Sure. Yeah.
So who knows? I always felt that it may sound strange, but going along the Boxer and Animal Farm was kind of a model. He kept muttering to himself, I must work harder, as things were going pear-shaped. Of course, he ended up in the knacker's yard, but that was that's probably where I'll end up. But it was always going back to the ethos of my parents, which is why I spoke about them at the start.
Yeah.
That it was to do your best.
Yeah.
It didn't matter if you were first, second, third, but as long as you did your best.
So anything
to be expected.
Do you have a bucket list? And if so, what's on it?
Well, I've always enjoyed traveling. Well, I've always enjoyed arriving rather than the actual travel.
Yeah.
And we've been very fortunate. We've been in all of the continents, but there are places in the world that I would like to see. Our first grandchild is due this week.
Oh,
so that's going to be a really important part of our life. We hope Absolutely. It goes well.
Well, prayers and blessings for that.
Yeah, and we have you've visited our house here in St. Kevin's Park. Well, we're about to move. We've sold it, and we're moving to next door because
I was going to say,
a new house in our garden.
The miniature version.
Well, it's an A-rated modern version, but it's externally sympathetic to its Edwardian neighbors.
Exactly. I'm sure that's what the planning application said. So, well, listen, Ronan, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today.
It was a great pleasure, John. And say hello to all there in Orlando.
Absolutely.
And I hope Matt we'll meet up and play golf sometime.
Absolutely.